Marcus stood by the window, watching the last rays of the sun dip below the horizon. The small research station in the middle of nowhere seemed quieter than ever. Most of the time, that silence was comforting, an escape from the noise of the world. But tonight, something felt different. A strange unease settled in his chest as he continued to stare at the empty stretch of land before him. His shift was over, and he was about to head to bed when a flash of light in the sky caught his attention. It wasn't like a normal shooting star or meteor. This one was too bright, too fast. He squinted, his curiosity getting the best of him. The light grew larger and more intense until, with a deafening crash, it slammed into the ground a few miles away. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. There was no way that could be natural. Without thinking, he grabbed his jacket and ran out of the station. He couldn't ignore the feeling that something was calling him out there. The night air was cool as he moved quickly across the rocky terrain. The darkness was thick, broken only by the distant glow of the crash site. As Marcus approached, the ground seemed to tremble beneath his feet. It wasn't just the force of the crash. Something in the air felt wrong. He reached the crash site to find a smoldering crater. Smoke rose from the charred earth, and pieces of metal were scattered all around. At first, he thought it was just debris, broken parts from some forgotten satellite or military experiment gone wrong. But then he saw her. Lying in the center of the wreckage, amidst the twisted metal, was a woman. Marcus froze, his eyes wide. She was unlike any human he'd ever seen. Her skin was a pale blue, almost translucent, shimmering faintly in the light of the fire. She had long, silvery hair that flowed across the ground like a stream of moonlight. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal, with sharp cheekbones and high-pointed ears that stood out in the stark contrast of the dark night. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored. The sight of her struck Marcus like a punch to the gut. He'd seen injuries before, but nothing like this. Something told him she wasn't from Earth. There was no way someone like her could exist on this planet. His instincts kicked in, and without hesitation, Marcus rushed over to her. Kneeling down, he checked for any signs of life. Her pulse was faint, but it was there. A sigh of relief escaped his lips, but that didn't mean she was out of danger. He carefully lifted her into his arms, cradling her as gently as he could. Despite the foreignness of the situation, something about the way she looked at him made him feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She was a stranger, yes, but she was also hurt, and she needed help. Marcus hurried back to the station, his mind racing. Who was she? What had happened? Why had she crashed on Earth? The doors to the station slid open with a soft hiss, and Marcus stepped inside, still carrying the alien woman. The familiar sights of the research lab seemed too small now, too confined. He quickly moved to the medical bay, laying her down on the examination table. His hands trembled as he tried to assess her injuries, but there was nothing he could immediately recognize. Her body was too different. Her wounds were alien to him. The burns on her skin seemed to glow faintly, but there was no sign of infection. He reached for a medkit, though he knew it probably wouldn't do much for her. The technology on Earth wasn't equipped to treat injuries like this. He fumbled with the devices, trying to make sense of the strange situation. The silence in the room seemed louder than ever. His breath was quick, and his mind raced. What should he do? She could be from anywhere, another planet, another galaxy even. It was difficult to grasp the enormity of what he had just discovered. Marcus sat down beside her, unsure of what to do next. His mind was still processing the shock of finding an alien being, one who appeared to be in desperate need of help. She was alone, helpless, and far from home. He glanced down at her face, trying to figure out what she might need. Was she a prisoner? A traveler? Her clothes didn't match anything he had ever seen, and the markings on her skin were unlike any human tattoos or designs. Suddenly, her eyes fluttered open. Marcus jolted back in surprise, his heart racing. The alien woman's gaze was unfocused at first, but slowly her bright silver eyes locked onto his. A flicker of recognition passed across her face, though it was unclear what she was seeing. Her voice, when it came, was weak but clear. "Help, please," she whispered. Marcus blinked, his thoughts spinning. Help? What could he possibly do for her? She was an alien, a being from the stars, and yet here she was, vulnerable, pleading for assistance. Her words echoed in his mind, and for a moment he was at a loss. But one thing was certain, he couldn't turn her away. She had nowhere else to go, and despite the danger, despite the questions that flooded his mind, he would help her, whatever it took. With a steady breath, Marcus nodded and spoke softly. "You're safe here. I'll take care of you." As he said those words, something deep inside him shifted. It was the start of something he couldn't yet understand, but one thing was clear. This was just the beginning of an unexpected journey, one that would change everything. Marcus sat beside the alien woman, who was still unconscious. The quiet hum of the medical bay was the only sound, but his thoughts were loud. He could hardly wrap his mind around what had just happened. A few hours ago, he had been a simple engineer working at a research station, and now he was caring for an alien. An alien who had crashed on Earth, who spoke human language, and who appeared to be in desperate need of help. Nothing made sense. He glanced down at the strange markings on her skin. They weren't tattoos. They seemed to be something more, symbols of a culture he could not even begin to understand. His curiosity grew with each passing minute, but so did the fear of the unknown. Who was she? Where had she come from? And most importantly, why had she been abandoned here? As he continued to study her, her eyelids fluttered again. Her silver eyes opened slowly, and she let out a soft groan. Her gaze was unfocused for a moment, but then it locked on Marcus, and he saw a flicker of recognition. "You?" Her voice was weak, but filled with an undeniable pleading. "Help me." Marcus swallowed hard, his mind racing. I will help you. Just rest for now," he said gently, not knowing what else to say. The alien woman's eyes fluttered again, but she managed to keep looking at him. Her voice was softer now, a quiet whisper that seemed to carry the weight of years of pain and confusion. "My people left me. They abandoned me." Marcus's heart sank. "Abandoned?" he asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and sympathy. She nodded slowly, wincing as if the movement hurt. "I was sent on a mission, the peace mission, but something went wrong." Her voice cracked, and she took a shallow breath. "I failed. My crew, my own people, they left me here." Marcus felt a deep pang of sympathy. He could see the pain in her eyes, the helplessness, the fear. She was far from home, injured, and stranded on a planet that wasn't her own. Her words barely made sense, but the emotion behind them was clear. She had been rejected by the very people she had trusted. "Why? Why didn't they help you?" Marcus asked, his voice soft and steady. The alien woman closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was tinged with sadness. "My people have honor, strict codes. If someone fails, they are cast aside. No forgiveness, no second chance." She paused, and her lips trembled. I failed my mission, and now I am nothing." Her words were heavy, and Marcus could hear the weight of them in her voice. He couldn't imagine being in her place, to be so far from home, to be cast aside by those who should have supported her. The loneliness and shame she felt were palpable, and he felt a deep sense of empathy for her. "That's not true," Marcus said, his voice firm. "You're not nothing. You're just in a tough situation right now, but you don't have to face it alone." The alien woman looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with doubt. "You would help me, even after what I've done, even though I am nothing?" Marcus nodded without hesitation. "Yes, you're not nothing. You're a person, and you're hurt. I can't just leave you out there." He paused for a moment, unsure of how to explain the next part. I don't know what happened to you or why your people left you, but I know that everyone deserves help. You don't deserve to be abandoned. The woman's gaze softened slightly, but there was still a lingering sadness in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely audible. I don't know what to do now. I'm lost. Marcus felt a sudden surge of determination. He couldn't undo what had happened to her, but he could help her find a way forward. He could offer her safety, comfort, and maybe even a sense of hope. He stood up and moved toward a nearby table where his tools were scattered. We'll figure this out. Together. I don't know much about where you come from, but I can help you get better. I can find a way to get you back on your feet. The alien woman watched him with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. You're not afraid of me? She asked softly. Marcus paused for a moment. Afraid of you? Oh. He turned to face her, offering a reassuring smile. I've seen a lot of strange things in my life, but I'm not afraid of you. I just want to help. The woman's expression wavered between uncertainty and hope. I don't deserve your kindness. You do, Marcus insisted, his voice steady. Everyone deserves kindness, no matter where they come from. As Marcus turned back to his workbench, he felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. He didn't know what kind of danger they might face, or what challenges would come next. But for now, he was going to do everything he could to help her. He wasn't just going to leave her stranded and alone. He wasn't going to let her be forgotten. The sound of her voice brought him back to reality. What's your name? She asked, her voice still weak, but filled with curiosity. Marcus, he replied, smiling as he walked back to her side. And you? I'm Scifi, she said, her voice still hesitant. Scifi of the Terran people. Marcus nodded, taking a moment to remember her name. It was a name he wouldn't forget. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, but one thing was certain, he wasn't about to let her face it alone. And so, as the hours passed, Marcus stayed by Scifi's side, doing what he could to care for her. It was a small start, but it was a beginning of something neither of them had expected. Days passed, and the small research station became the unlikely home for Marcus and Scifi. The quiet hum of the station, once familiar and ordinary, now felt like a haven. The constant flow of work had become a distraction for Marcus, but with Scifi's presence, everything had changed. His thoughts no longer focused solely on his engineering projects. Instead, he found himself deeply concerned for her, thinking about how he could help her recover from the wounds that still lingered beneath her strange, glowing skin. Scifi's condition slowly improved. Her wounds healed with an unnatural speed, a sign of the alien technology that coursed through her body, though the scars from the crash remained. Her energy returned, but so did her doubts and fears. She had lived a life of honor and pride, only to be abandoned by her people. The shame weighed heavily on her, and though she was grateful for Marcus's help, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was broken beyond repair. It wasn't long before the two of them fell into a routine. Marcus would spend his days working on the systems of the research station, fixing machinery and running diagnostics. He always made time to check on Scifi, helping her with basic tasks like learning Earth's languages and adapting to its culture. He marveled at how intelligent she was. Despite her distress, she had an incredible ability to learn. Within days, she had begun speaking more fluently, and Marcus was astonished by her understanding of technology. Scifi, for her part, was eager to help in any way she could. She often watched Marcus work, asking questions about his world and his life. Her curiosity was boundless, and slowly she began to share more of her own story. The Terran people, she explained, were an ancient race, once powerful and respected across the stars. They believed in peace, but peace came at a cost. Over time, the Terran Empire had become weaker, torn apart by internal struggles and betrayals. Sarah had been chosen for a peace mission to Earth, tasked with bringing Earth into the fold of a galactic alliance. However, something had gone wrong. The mission had failed, and her crew, her closest companions, had turned against her. They blamed her for the failure and cast her aside. She was left to die on a foreign planet, far from home, with no one to care for her. The loneliness in her voice was palpable, and it struck Marcus to his core. The idea of being abandoned, stranded in a distant world, was a pain he couldn't imagine. He tried to comfort her as best as he could, but Syra's pain seemed to run deeper than anything he could fix. One evening, after another long day of working side by side, Marcus and Syra found themselves sitting together in the small living area of the station. The light from the control panels cast a soft glow across the room, and for the first time, Marcus noticed the exhaustion on her face. She had been quiet all day, lost in her thoughts. "Syra," Marcus began, his voice gentle. "You don't have to carry all of this alone. I'm here to help." She turned to him, her silver eyes glinting in the dim light. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I have failed. I was supposed to bring peace. Instead, I brought dishonor. How can I go back to my people like this? How can I show my face again when they abandoned me without a second thought?" Marcus could see the turmoil in her eyes. She had been a leader, a warrior, someone respected in her own world. Now she was broken, stranded far from home, and the guilt of her perceived failure was eating away at her. "You're not the one who failed," Marcus said firmly. "You did everything you could. Sometimes things go wrong, and people, they make mistakes. But that doesn't mean you're worthless. You're not broken, Syra. You're just hurt, and you'll heal in time." She looked at him for a long moment, the weight of her past clashing with his words. For a while, the silence hung between them, but then Syra sighed softly, her shoulders slumping in resignation. "I never thought I would end up like this," she murmured. Alone, with no one to turn to. Marcus's heart went out to her, and without thinking, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it seemed to comfort her in a way nothing else could. She met his gaze, and for the first time since their meeting, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. "You're not alone anymore," Marcus said, his voice steady and reassuring. "I'm here. And as long as you need me, I'll help you. Whatever it takes." A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips, but it was fragile, like a flower just beginning to bloom after a long winter. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't think I would find kindness here." Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "Kindness is something everyone deserves, Syra. No matter where they come from, no matter what they've done." The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the bond between Marcus and Syra grew stronger. They were more than just a human and an alien. They were two beings, learning from each other, supporting one another. Marcus found himself more and more invested in her well-being, and he began to realize something he hadn't expected. He cared for her, not just as someone he had rescued, but as someone who had become a part of his life in ways he couldn't explain. Syra, too, was beginning to change. The guilt that had once consumed her was slowly being replaced by a sense of purpose. She was learning to see herself as more than just the woman who had failed her mission. She was someone with a future, someone who could rebuild her life, even if that life wasn't on her home planet. And Marcus was a part of that future. As they continued to work together, Marcus couldn't help but wonder about the bigger picture. What would happen if Syra's people came looking for her? Would they demand her return, or would they simply leave her in the past? Marcus didn't know the answers, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. Whatever the future held, he was ready to face it, side by side with Syra. The days at the research station had settled into a predictable routine. Marcus would work on his systems and maintenance tasks, while Syra, now in better health, would assist him when she could. She was learning fast, too fast for Marcus to keep up sometimes. Her alien intelligence was a sharp contrast to his own human limitations, and he found himself more and more impressed by her. Despite their growing comfort, there was an ever-present unease that hovered just beneath the surface. The station was isolated, tucked far away from human settlements, but Syra's past still weighed heavily on them. She was an alien, stranded on a foreign world, and her people had abandoned her. The thought lingered in Marcus's mind constantly. What would happen if her people came looking for her? That unease turned into something much more dangerous one cold morning when Marcus was in the middle of routine repairs. The station's outer panels had been hit by the debris from a nearby asteroid field, and he was working on sealing the damage when his communication panel beeped, the sound sharp and urgent. He stepped over to it, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. The screen flickered on, and the image of an unfamiliar ship filled the screen. It was large, heavily armed, and its design was completely foreign to anything he'd ever seen. His breath caught in his throat. "Marcus," Syra's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had appeared behind him, drawn by the alarm. "What's wrong?" He turned to her, his eyes wide with concern. "That ship, it's not one I recognize. It's not from Earth." Syra's expression went pale. Her hand instinctively moved toward the wound on her arm that had mostly healed. "It's them," she whispered. "They found me." Marcus froze, his heart racing. He had expected the day might come when Syra's people, or the ones who had abandoned her, would track her down, but the reality of it hit him hard. He didn't know what they wanted, but he wasn't about to let them take her back. He couldn't. "They're coming for you?" Marcus asked, his voice low, intense. Syra nodded, her fear evident. "They must have discovered I survived. They will not show mercy. To fail is a grave dishonor. And for me to still be alive." She trailed off, her voice shaking. "They'll do anything to bring me back. I'm a disgrace to them." Marcus stepped closer, his resolve hardening. "Not if I can help it. We'll figure this out." Syra gave him a long, uncertain look, but before she could say anything more, the panel beeped again, this time with a more urgent tone. A transmission request from the ship. They weren't wasting any time. Marcus hesitated. "Should we respond?" he asked, his hand hovering over the accept button. Syra's face was a mask of fear and uncertainty. "I don't know if we have a choice." With a heavy heart, Marcus pressed the button, and the image on the screen shifted. A figure appeared, tall, dark, and imposing, wearing armor that glinted in the dim light. The face was hidden behind a helmet, but the cold, calculating tone of the voice that came through was unmistakable. "Syra of the Terran," the voice said, the words clipped and commanding. "You are ordered to surrender. Return to your people, or we will be forced to take action." Syra took a step back, her expression one of pure terror. "They've come for me," she whispered to herself. Marcus clenched his fists. "What happens if you go back?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. Syra turned to him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "They will execute me. I'll never be allowed to return to my people. I failed, and failure has consequences." The voice from the ship cut through the tension, demanding once again that Syra return to her ship. "You will come now, Syra, or we will come to you. There is no place on this planet where you can hide from us. Your fate is sealed." Marcus's eyes darted back to the communication panel. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't let them take her. Not after everything they had been through. He had to protect her. "What if we don't let them take you?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with determination. Syra shook her head, her expression full of regret. "They won't stop. They will destroy this station. They will destroy everything in their path until I am found." Marcus took a deep breath. "Then we need to leave. Now." Syra looked up at him, surprised by his words. "But where would we go? We're on Earth. They will find us wherever we run." "I'll figure something out," Marcus said, already thinking ahead. "We'll escape, and we'll find somewhere safe. I won't let them take you back to a life of misery." He turned quickly, grabbing a few tools from the workbench, setting to work on the station's escape pod. It wasn't designed for deep space travel, but it would have to do. Time was running out. He could feel the pressure building, each second bringing them closer to danger. Cyrus stood by, watching him, a mixture of fear and disbelief in her eyes. "Marcus, you really would risk everything for me?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus didn't look up as he worked. "You've been through enough. I won't let you go back to that life. You deserve better, and I won't let them take you." The ship outside began to move closer, its massive size blocking out the stars. Marcus knew they had only minutes before it would arrive at the station. He worked faster, his mind focused on nothing but getting them out of there. Cyrus stepped forward, watching him work. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore," she said quietly. "But I want to believe in you, Marcus. I want to believe that there's a chance for me. For us." Marcus finally looked up, meeting her gaze. "You can trust me," he said firmly. "We'll make it through this. Together." With that, he sealed the escape pod's hatch, and they prepared to flee. The first of many challenges had arrived, but it wouldn't be the last, and Marcus knew that whatever happened next, he wouldn't leave Syra behind. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. The countdown had begun. Marcus stared out the small window of the research station, his hands gripping the metal rail tightly. The shadow of the massive ship loomed overhead, casting an eerie darkness over the station. Its engines hummed, a low, threatening sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He had only minutes to act, and his mind was racing. Cyrus stood beside him, her face pale, eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. The ship had been circling for what felt like hours, giving them enough time to prepare for the worst. But now, a moment of truth had come. They had no more time to waste. "Are you sure about this?" Syra asked, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus nodded, his expression determined. "We don't have a choice. They'll destroy everything here if we don't leave. We've got to get to the pod and escape before they find us." He had spent the last few minutes securing the escape pod, making sure all systems were ready for takeoff. It wasn't much, barely enough to get them off the planet's surface, let alone anywhere far enough to be safe. But it was their only shot. He had no plan beyond that. All he could think about was getting Syra away from the danger that was closing in on them. "I don't know where we'll go," Marcus continued, his voice low, "but I'll figure something out. You don't deserve to be hunted like this." Syra's gaze softened, but the sadness in her eyes didn't go away. "You've done so much already. I don't know how to repay you for everything." "You don't have to," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I'm doing this because it's the right thing. You're not alone anymore." Syra closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Marcus could see the weight of her thoughts in the way her shoulders slumped. She had never asked for this, never wanted to be a fugitive, running from her people. But now it was the only path she had left. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude, though there was a trace of hesitation in it. "I never thought anyone would care enough to help me." "You're worth caring about, Syra," Marcus said, looking at her with a soft but genuine smile. "Let's just get you safe, and then we'll figure the rest out." Together, they moved quickly through the station's halls, each step bringing them closer to the pod. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. There was a shared understanding now, a bond formed by the desperate circumstances they had found themselves in. Marcus wasn't sure what kind of future they had ahead of them, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to leave her behind. They'd reached the pod just as the ship outside began to send a pulse of light toward them. The ship's engines powered up, and Marcus could feel the tension mounting. He looked at Syra, who had moved to the console, ready to help him initiate the launch sequence. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were focused, determined. "Do you think they'll follow us?" she asked, her voice quiet. "They might," Marcus admitted, "but we'll have a head start. And I'll keep us on the move. We won't stay in one place for too long." The pod systems lit up in front of him, and Marcus quickly began inputting commands. He could hear the ship's engines getting louder, closer. They had no time to waste. Every second counted. As the countdown on the console reached 0, the pod's engines roared to life. Marcus grabbed the control handles, his heart pounding in his chest. Syra sat beside him, her fingers clutching the seat as the pod began to lift off the ground. The station shuddered, and Marcus glanced back through the small window. The large ship was still in the sky, but they were pulling away quickly. He focused all his energy on piloting the pod through the rocky terrain below, pushing the throttle forward as the station began to shrink in the distance. "Hold on," Marcus muttered under his breath as he veered the pod into the open sky, feeling the thrill of escape. They were free, at least for now. He had no idea where they were going, but the feeling of being untethered, of leaving behind the threat that had loomed over them for so long, was exhilarating. But Syra's voice broke through his thoughts. "They're following us," she said, her voice sharp. Marcus glanced at the screen, and sure enough, the ship was accelerating toward them, its engines glowing brightly in the distance. They hadn't escaped yet. "They'll catch up quickly if we don't lose them," Marcus said, gripping the controls tighter. "I'll try to make some sharp turns, keep them off our tail." He adjusted the pod's speed, making it dive and weave through the air as the larger ship began to fire warning shots, loud blasts that rattled the small pod. Marcus winced as each shot exploded in the distance, narrowly missing them. "Hold on," he shouted, making another sharp turn. The pod dipped and soared, dodging the blasts as best as he could. The feeling of weightlessness hit them briefly as the pod tumbled, but Marcus righted it quickly, his heart racing in his chest. "Marcus, we have to lose them," Syra urged, her eyes wide with panic. "I'm trying," he shouted back. The reality of their situation hit him like a punch to the gut. They weren't out of danger yet. In fact, they were running straight into it. Marcus gritted his teeth. He wasn't going to let them be caught. He wasn't going to let Syra down. He focused on the controls, pushing the pod harder, hoping for just enough distance to escape the enemy ship's firepower. The ship was getting closer, the blasts growing louder. He could feel the pressure building as the pod fought against gravity, its thrusters working overtime. And then in the distance, he saw something. A shimmering light. It was faint at first, barely visible against the backdrop of the stars. But as they drew closer, it grew brighter. A planet, a place to hide. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "This is it," Marcus said, breathing a sigh of relief. "We'll land there. We can rest, figure out our next move." The enemy ship was still on their tail, but they had a chance now. They had an escape route. As the planet grew closer, Marcus focused all his attention on the landing, hoping against hope that they could make it safely. He could hear Syra breathing beside him, her presence a quiet but constant reminder of the bond they shared. They weren't free yet, but for the first time since they began this journey, Marcus felt like they might have a fighting chance. The planet below loomed closer as Marcus piloted the escape pod toward its surface. His hands gripped the controls tightly, and his mind raced. The enemy ship was still trailing them, relentless in its pursuit. It had been firing at them ever since they broke free from the research station, and the blasts were getting closer. Each hit rattled the small pod, making it harder to maintain control. Syra sat next to him, her eyes fixed on the screen as the planet grew larger. "We're almost there," she said, her voice steady but filled with concern. "But they're not giving up. They'll follow us to the surface if we're not careful." Marcus nodded, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. He didn't have much experience with high-speed evasion, but he had no choice but to keep pushing forward. The pod wasn't built for combat. It wasn't designed for this kind of chase, but it was the only option they had. "Hold on tight," he said, his voice tight with determination. "We'll lose them when we hit the atmosphere. If we can get past the first layer of clouds, they won't be able to follow us as easily." With every passing second, the pod shook more violently. The enemy ship was closing in, its weapons charging. Marcus could see the incoming fire on his screens, bright red beams cutting through the dark void of space, aimed straight at them. His hands flew across the controls, maneuvering the pod as best as he could, making sharp turns to avoid the blasts. Come on, come on, Marcus muttered to himself, willing the pod to stay in the air. They were nearing the atmosphere, but it felt like the enemy ship was right on top of them. The pod dipped and swerved, narrowly dodging another round of fire that rocked the vessel. Syra's face was tense, but she didn't look away from the screen. We need to lose them before we reach the surface. If they catch up while we're landing, we won't make it. Marcus nodded, his heart pounding. I know. We're almost there. He pushed the pod's throttle to its maximum, the engines roaring as the vessel accelerated toward the clouds. The tension in the air was suffocating. The enemy ship wasn't far behind, and Marcus knew they had only moments before they were in range of another attack. Just as the first layer of atmosphere hit, the pod lurched violently. The air pressure shifted, and the ship began to shake even more. Marcus gritted his teeth, fighting to keep control. The turbulence was unbearable, but they had no choice but to push through. We're in the clouds, Syra shouted, but they're still coming. Marcus looked back at the screen. The enemy ship was still visible, closing in faster than ever. But the thick atmosphere was starting to take its toll on the pursuing ship. Their weapons fire was becoming erratic, the energy blasts disintegrating in the thick clouds before they could reach the pod. Syra's voice broke through the chaos. They're losing us. We've got a chance. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Just a little longer, he said through clenched teeth, as he made a sharp turn to dive lower, closer to the ground. The pod raced through the clouds, the thick fog surrounding them. The enemy ship was still tailing them, but now it was much harder to track their movements. The thick clouds blocked their view, providing just enough cover for Marcus to maneuver. But they weren't in the clear yet. The planet's surface was still miles away, and the danger of crashing into the unknown ground below loomed large. Marcus focused all his attention on the navigation screen, his mind calculating the distance and speed. He had to find a safe place to land, and he had to do it fast. There's a clearing ahead, Syra said, pointing at a spot on the screen. It's our best shot. Marcus adjusted the controls, steering the pod toward the clearing. It was a narrow area, but it was their only option. He could see the trees below growing larger as they descended, the pod's engines roaring in protest as they rushed toward the ground. Here we go, Marcus shouted, his hand steady as he aimed for the clearing. The ground was rapidly approaching, and he had to land the pod perfectly. With a sudden jolt, the pod touched down, skimming the treetops before it bounced and skidded to a stop on the soft earth. The impact was jarring, but the pod held together. Marcus exhaled sharply, his body tensed from the effort, as he looked around the clearing. They had made it, barely. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The pod sat still in the middle of the small clearing, the hum of the engines dying down to a soft buzz. Outside, the thick fog rolled around them, and the enemy ship was nowhere in sight. They had done it. They had lost them, at least for now. Syra let out a slow breath, her body shaking slightly from the adrenaline. We made it, she said softly, her voice filled with awe. I didn't think we would. Marcus turned to her, his face filled with relief. I didn't think so either. He gave a small, exhausted smile. But we're safe. For now. Sarah met his gaze, and for the first time since they had met, she seemed to relax. The fear and tension in her face melted away as she realized that, against all odds, they had escaped. They were alive, and they were free. For the moment. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, still trying to catch his breath. The battle wasn't over, but they had made it this far. They had escaped the immediate danger, but the uncertainty of what came next still loomed. They were alone on an unknown planet, with no way of knowing if Syra's people would find them again. But for now, they had time to regroup, to breathe, and to plan their next move. Now what? Syra asked, her voice quiet but full of hope. Marcus looked around the clearing, the trees swaying gently in the wind. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. They would face whatever came next together. Now we survive, he said, a determined look in his eyes. And we figure out what to do next. They had made it this far. And together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. The pod sat quietly in the clearing, surrounded by dense trees and thick underbrush. The only sounds that filled the air were the soft rustling of the leaves and the distant chirping of birds, sounds that were entirely unfamiliar to Marcus. He couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. The planet was beautiful, untouched by human hands, but it was also wild, untamed, and full of unknown dangers. Marcus sat in the cockpit, staring out at the dense forest beyond. His mind was racing, trying to absorb the enormity of what had just happened. They had made it. They had escaped the enemy ship, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he was allowing himself to breathe. He glanced over at Syra, who was sitting across from him, her silver eyes wide. She took in their new surroundings. Her face was still pale from the fear and stress of their escape, but there was something different in her gaze, something that hadn't been there before, a spark of hope. "Well," Marcus said, his voice breaking the silence, "we're alive, but we can't stay here forever." Syra turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "No, we can't," she agreed. "But for now, I think we're safe. I never thought I would have a chance to just breathe again, not like this." Marcus nodded, understanding what she meant. The constant tension, the fear of being found, had weighed heavily on both of them. But now, they had a moment, a brief moment, where they could simply exist without looking over their shoulders. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this kind of peace. They sat in the cockpit for a while, not speaking, just taking in the strange beauty of the planet around them. The sky above was a soft shade of blue, with a few clouds drifting lazily across the horizon. The air was cool, the smell of fresh earth filling their lungs. It was a stark contrast to the cold, metallic hum of the station they had just escaped from. Finally, Marcus broke the silence again. "We'll need to find shelter. This isn't going to be a place we can stay for long, but it's better than nothing." Syra looked out the window at the dense forest. "The trees will provide some cover, but we need to be careful. This place is unfamiliar. We don't know what dangers might be lurking." He gave her a reassuring smile. "We'll be careful. I've got some survival training, and you've got that sharp mind of yours. Together, we'll make it work." Syra smiled faintly, her expression softening. "I don't think I've ever had someone believe in me this much." Marcus looked at her, his heart tightening slightly. "You deserve to be believed in," he said simply. "I won't let anything happen to you." For the first time, Syra didn't argue. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes reflecting the trust she had started to place in him. The uncertainty was still there, but it seemed less heavy now. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it, together. After a moment of silence, Marcus stood up and stretched, his muscles sore from the long hours spent piloting the pod. "Let's get moving," he said. "We'll explore the area, find something useful, and figure out what to do next." They both exited the pod, stepping into the soft grass and overgrowth of the clearing. The air felt alive with possibilities, but the danger still lingered in the back of Marcus's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't completely safe. Syra's enemies would stop at nothing to find her, and now that they had been discovered, it was only a matter of time before someone came looking again. "Do you think they'll find us here?" Syra asked quietly, her voice laced with worry. Marcus looked over at her, his expression firm. "I'm not sure, but we'll stay ahead of them. We can't let our guard down, but we've got time. Time to figure things out. Time to breathe." Syra nodded, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. For a moment, Marcus watched her, wondering what thoughts were running through her mind. He could see the weight of her past on her shoulders, the struggle to reconcile who she was with who she had become. She had been a leader, a warrior, someone who had once commanded respect. Now she was a fugitive, hiding on a strange planet, unsure of what her future held. But in that moment, Marcus saw something new in her, a flicker of resilience. It wasn't much, but it was there. And for the first time, he believed it was enough. They walked through the forest for hours, taking in the beauty of the planet and searching for anything that could help them survive. The trees were unlike any Marcus had seen before, tall and thick with dark green leaves. Strange animals flitted in and out of the underbrush, their eyes watching them warily. The air was thick with the scent of earth and vegetation, and the farther they walked, the more it felt like they were discovering an entirely new world. As night began to fall, they found a small cave tucked into the side of a hill. It was a simple shelter, but it was enough. The entrance was narrow, but deep inside, they could tell it would provide shelter from the elements and potential threats. They spent the next few hours gathering firewood and setting up camp. As the fire crackled in the center of the cave, Marcus sat down across from Syra, the warmth of the flames casting flickering shadows on their faces. He could see the weariness in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a quiet determination. "This is different," Syra said softly, staring into the fire. "I never thought I would be here, on Earth, hiding, running, but somehow this feels peaceful." Marcus looked at her, his eyes softening. "We'll make it work. We've come this far." Sarah met his gaze, her silver eyes shining in the firelight. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. I don't think I can ever repay you for what you've done." He shook his head, smiling. "You don't have to. We're in this together, and I believe we can figure it out." The fire crackled between them, and in the quiet of the cave, it was as if the world outside had disappeared. They had no idea what the future held, but for the first time since their journey began, Marcus felt a sense of peace. They had escaped the immediate danger. They had found a place to rest. And maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild a future together.